Hi, good morning, everyone. Early birds, I am excited to start the day off with everyone here. First session of the day on DLP. So usually when I introduce myself to folks as the Forrester analyst who covers DLP, I get one of two reactions. On one hand, it could be something along the lines of, I hate this thing so much. Let me tell you all the reasons why, all the failed things that I've tried to do with this technology, the headaches that it's giving me, the promises that the vendor has made, and it's just not there. On the other hand, I get folks who go, well, we should talk because we're trying to do this. We want to understand how do we best approach this. You know, there's a sense of optimism there. So I'm kind of curious today in the room, who falls into that first camp, the folks who have been burned by DLP? You've got your war stories, your scars from all of this. Got a couple of folks. Oh, okay, yep. What about folks in the second camp? This is something that's you're trying to do. Oh, some more. Okay, a lot more. All right. So today, there's going to be a little bit of something for everybody in terms of this topic and this talk. So hopefully, even though you've been burned before, this presents a different way of thinking about it. And if this is something that you're embarking on, it gives you a way to frame it as well. Okay, before we begin, disclaimers from RSA conference. The usual legal stuff, sessions may be recorded. They don't take any responsibility for what I'm about to say, which is probably a good thing. So off we go. Glitter. So DLP, it's like glitter. The shiny thing that we're all just trying to get. It's like your hopes and dreams in a bottle. But what does DLP even mean? Right? We think about DLP. I talk to folks about DLP and they could be referring to strategy, their program for data security. They could be referring to DLP technologies, like the solution that they go buy from a vendor like a Symantec, for example. They could be referring to DLP capabilities and features that they're getting within something else that they've purchased, other technologies within their environment that have that functionality. They could be referring to all sorts of other types of data controls that are just not DLP. So that little acronym, data loss prevention, those three letters, they carry a lot. But the one thing that everybody has in common when they are talking about DLP is that what they're actually trying to do is get to DLP as an outcome. Unfortunately, DLP is like glitter. It's a bit messy. As much as we try to harness it, to do things with it, we can run into some challenges based on how we're trying to handle it, where we apply it, what we're trying to achieve. The great thing is DLP is like glitter. There are so many things you can do with DLP. And think about something like DLP as an outcome. This is what I think about as DLP as an outcome, where you're changing your mindset to think of DLP as the approach. You are not letting a specific technology dictate that approach. So you're not building everything around trying to make this solution work. You're looking at an approach and then thinking about, well, what are the technologies that are going to support that outcome that you're trying to achieve? So it's like you're trying to make this mask. You're using different types of glitter, maybe different colors of glitter. You're applying it strategically in different places to get a particular result. But you recognize that it's not just about glitter, because sometimes you might want to bedazzle things with a couple of gems. You might want to pull in some neon feathers to make this even better. And that's DLP as an outcome. It's technologies, but it's also not just DLP technologies. It's other types of controls that you bring in. It's also policies and processes that you have to blend in as well. And so what does Gen AI have to do with this? Gen AI, generative AI, it gives us an opportunity to think about DLP as an outcome and how we might achieve that. But in order to do that, we have to sort of back up a little bit and break things down with Gen AI. Because if DLP is the answer to Gen AI, then well, what's the question that we're actually asking, right? What's the risk that we're trying to mitigate? using something like DLP. Because the risks of using Gen AI, it all depends, the threats of Gen AI also depends on the use case, what you're trying to do with this. So DLP may not be the answer, but it could also be the answer, depending on the use case. And the use case matters because this is what's going to help you back out what you're actually going to need. The use case matters because it also depends on, does this use case rely on personal data to make it happen? Does it rely on corporate data? Does it rely on all of the above? And what are the actual relevant data concerns that are involved here? Is it really about data loss, data exposure? Is it data exfiltration? Is it data tampering? These are all really different things. And so to mitigate the risk of these things, you need different approaches, but you need to identify what those risks are first based on the use case. So I'll walk you through a couple here today as examples. So developers, if you have developers who are trying to use Gen AI, these Turing bots, to help them write code, is that really a DLP issue? I mean, there's some threats here. You might have some IP theft concerns, but it's really a code security issue when you think about the threats and the risks of this particular use case. It's not so much a concern around privacy or personal data use. Another use case could be, this is a little, marketing use case. So your marketers are trying to use Gen AI to generate drafts, generate copy for, let's say, an upcoming campaign. What are we thinking about here? Certain threats, depending on what content they're trying to put in to these systems. Could be data exfil concerns, competitive intelligence issues that you might want to consider. Similar risk here in terms of how they're using the results that are getting generated. But again, this one's not really related to concerns around privacy either, based on the inputs that they may be using. And here's another one, sales. So you've got your sales folks who may be using Gen AI tools to help them draft emails, let's say to prospects or to customers, to use more inclusive language in their outreach, to try to make that connection with people. Which sounds great. It's a great tool. I've also heard of salespeople trying to use this as a way of generating data sheets for a product, which is great, but they have to remember to run it by the product people to make sure the product actually does what this sheet says it does. It's a different kind of risk. But in this scenario, yeah, potentially you might have some privacy concerns because are they trying to use customer data to do this, which is personal info. And another factor here with the use cases, it also depends on what's the actual application. Because it's one thing if these employees are going to a public application like ChatGPT or Gemini, something, one of these, anything that anyone can go to generate these responses. It's another one if they are turning to, let's say, an internal tool that your company has some degree of control over. So this starts to get a bit, it's complicated depending on what they're using. And privacy is typically going to be a key concern in a lot of these use cases, especially once you start talking internally to people about use cases and employees using these technologies, and rightly so, right? Today, I'd say there are probably three big categories of things to think about on this side. One is going to be the EU AI Act. So this is the world's first binding set of requirements around AI use and systems. It really forces you to think about what are the relevant risks involved with this particular use. There's a bunch of requirements that come from it, not just around cybersecurity, but other things like accuracy, addressing issues around bias, and more, and being transparent and doing a lot more documentation around what you're doing with these systems. There's also plenty of existing regulations that will apply here as well. So ultimately, AI, Gen AI, it's a form of data processing. So your privacy regulations and compliance requirements will apply as well, even though these specific privacy regulations may not call out AI explicitly. It is still a form of data processing. So GDPR certainly applies, but you've also got tons of other US state laws around processing and automated decision-making, sharing, sale of data as well. You've got existing things that have existed for a while, like antitrust, fair competition, consumer protections. So this is all about how are you using the results that are being generated. Because if it's for hiring decisions, that's another issue. So there's a lot to think about in terms of the governance, not just of the data going in and out of these models, but how you're using them. What decisions do you make? You also have contractual obligations related to data use, data processing as well. So it's forcing us to review contracts, terms and conditions, and a lot of policies that we have today, and agreements and licenses that we might have with our partners. So key directions, questions to direct your approach. Going back to the question of if DLP is the answer, like what is the question that we're asking? So I highlighted how the use case starts to uncover some more context to help you direct your approach, because it helps you to get to what are the actual risks that you're trying to mitigate. But there's one more to unpack here, and that is how are you interacting with the LLM? So Gen AI, it's a really broad term to describe this type of AI. But what's underneath it, the engine behind it, is the LLM, the large language model. And today, there's going to be a couple of different ways that we see organizations typically interacting with LLMs. So I'll describe each of these in a little bit, but then in the following slides, I'll break it down a little bit more to talk about what are specific things you can be doing in each one to better control your data and the types of capabilities you would need to develop. So first off is the default way of using it, which is, call it bring your own AI. So these are all of the publicly available free tools that any employee can get to on the internet to use. ChatGPT, or Bard, or now Gemini, the DALL-Es of the world, all these other applications that are including it. So that's everybody that's going to be affected by this. You also have one option where now this is embedded into the other technologies, software applications that you buy that exist within your enterprise environment. So think about Microsoft Copilot. That's the key example here. But it could be any other thing that you have, like your CRM software and system. They may be embedding Copilot-like capabilities. Same with other tools that you have. So I'd say that probably just about every organization is also going to be dealing with option one, just because it's going to show up in the other stuff that you buy, regardless of whether or not you ask for it. Option two here, tune and engineer a pre-trained model. This is something that we see more and more companies trying to do. So this is taking an LLM into your organization as you're trying to develop your own internal application with Gen AI. So this could be something that is only internal, employee-facing, a tool that people can use to do their jobs, do it better, to better retrieve information. It could also be something that you're developing that is now customer-facing, that your customers can use. And the last option, option three, is to train a custom model. So few organizations will likely go down this path, just thinking about the massive amounts of data that you would consider sucking in to train this type of model. Today, it's mostly really big high-tech firms that are trying to do this. So if we think about also, so this outlines the different approaches of how you may be interacting with an LLM. But as you're thinking about data controls, it can be helpful to break it out into three key phases, because these are the phases where there's something happening with data that may be causing some type of concern. One is certainly with the training of it, whether you are trying to train your own models, whether you are interacting with other models and concerned that what you're putting in is also going to train these things. There's the prompts. So what's the user actually typing in as a question, for example? What information are they including in that? Is that something that should be going in? Is there sensitive information contained in that? Perhaps personal info or something else that's sensitive from a corporate perspective. The responses that come out on the other end. So there's a lot of attention, I think, today paid to the prompts, the training, but the responses also deserve attention as well, because this is something that's being created by the AI. You hear a lot of thinking around, well, hallucinations, bias that's coming out from these models and the responses, but there's also sensitive information that could be getting spit out. It could also be that this response, this thing that's being generated, whether it's like a text summary of a meeting or something else, that it could also now contain potentially sensitive information as well. So now this new piece of content is something that you have to protect. So different dimensions to it. So let's take a look at this first one for your bring up your own AI use case. So you certainly want to be giving guidance to employees for how to use this stuff, your policies. And for all the folks who are looking at DLP, this is one of the key places where, yes, DLP capabilities can be useful because they offer two key benefits. One is it gives you a good amount of visibility into what's happening. Where are people going to? What might they be trying to input into these systems? And if you have no idea where to start, and you already have existing DLP tools that give you visibility into what websites people are hitting up, this can be helpful for at least getting a rough feel of what parts of your workforce are really excited about this and trying to use these tools, what parts less so. That gives you some direction as to where you might want to do more awareness training or give more detailed guidance, prescriptive guidance to folks about how to use these tools. And there's also the control piece of it. You can block some of what might be going into these prompts that people are using as well. I would just not outright block access to all of these tools because we know how that typically goes. You block it, people who are determined are going to find their way around it and still get to it. In talking to companies, I find that those who do take the approach of we are just going to block this from the start, that's only a temporary measure. They block it for now so that they can get their ducks in a row, get things lined up before opening up access again. So it's not a permanent thing. Embedded in other technologies you use is another way that you're going to be interacting with these LLMs. And so I think about these co-pilots that are showing up in various tools as they're kind of like toddlers. They're going to get whatever they have access to, right, and just give it to you, because that's what they do. So ultimately, it's an access control issue. A lot of what these GenAI co-pilot type tools are exposing are your underlying messes when it comes to open permissions and entitlements, things that have just been available to everybody, but no one really knew about it. But now you have this GenAI that's sucking all of this up and it's able to access it and serve up what it is able to access. So this is where something like data access governance tools can help to do a bit of cleanup, find out all the open permissions, lock things down a bit more, enable least privilege so that these LLMs, these GenAI co-pilot type tools can only access what they hopefully should access and nothing more. It's also an area where data classification can be helpful because oftentimes a lot of these tools may pivot off of the classification label to enable some type of control. But the challenge here is that if you don't already have these things in place, the classification piece of it, that's a bit more of a heavy lift for a lot of folks to embark on. So think of it as like a parallel thing that you're doing along with data access governance, if that's not something that's already there. But if you had to prioritize something to at least stop the bleeding and to get more confidence in enabling some of these co-pilots, then I'd say go for the data access governance piece of it. There's also third-party risk management, because ultimately this is a third-party risk management issue. As you're buying these other softwares, technologies that have GenAI included within it, you want to understand this a little bit more about what did they actually include? How did they make this? So think of the chicken in this case, because it's the chicken versus the egg. You're getting an egg, and the egg could be the LLM, the egg could be the GenAI application, depending on the stakeholder here, right? Because if you are a data scientist, the LLM is the egg. If you are a security person, the application, the GenAI application is the egg. And I say chicken and the egg because you think about it, it's a one-way street. The egg comes out of that chicken, you're not putting it back in. So you want to ask about this chicken that made the egg. So was it a happy chicken, free range, running around the pasture? Did they eat bugs as a part of their diet? Did they get all the grasshoppers? Did they get to eat pumpkin seeds and apples? So ask questions about this chicken. But for real, questions to ask. These are examples of questions that you can ask your tech suppliers that are embedding Gen AI capabilities into the products that you use. Ask them about the deployment options that are available to you to meet your internal security and privacy policies. Ask them about what configuration options you have to turn this capability on and off, because maybe that will buy you a little bit more time before you're ready to actually use this. What kinds of monitoring, detection, alerting, response capabilities do they have to help protect people from making queries that are unsafe, unethical, or dangerous? So what can they do to prevent bad things from happening is another way of thinking of this, as well as controls that they have to prevent data leakage and monitoring, self-explanatory. There's also more questions you can ask them about, well, do they have a dedicated data governance program for training data? Like what went into this thing that they created? Can you trust the guardrails? Did they even think about guardrails going into it? Will they provide you with a list of sources that was used to train the AI solution? Are the data governance practices related to development and delivery that they use to give things to you, is that also something that they use internally themselves for internal AI use cases? So are they drinking their own champagne? That could be interesting to see. Do they also help you identify content that's human versus machine generated? And this can be helpful for transparency purposes and also for your users who are getting these results, because that can give them some information, inform them as to what might they be doing with this. Can they trust this? Can they handle this in a certain way? Give them the opportunity to decide, but to be able to label it so that they can actually see that this is AI generated, machine generated, can be a helpful factor. And this is not an exhaustive list of questions, but it gives you a sense of the kinds of questions you can and certainly should be asking these vendors. Option 2, you go tune and engineer a pre-trained model. So you're building something as an organization, whether it's for internal use or for your customers. So again, you want to give guidance for people to how to use this new thing that you're developing. You also want to identify requirements, like get your A team together, all of the stakeholders who are going to have concerns and questions that are related to privacy and use and security of these types of tools. So typical ones you might encounter would be GRC, legal, your DevOps people, IT, security, data science as well. And right now, no one really has all the answers, but getting people together so to at least voice concerns gives you some grounding, some baseline for being able to say, this is the stuff that we are worried about. What can we think about going forward? Who do we ask to figure out the path forward? And it gets everybody on the same page as well. Understanding the data use case, the pipeline, the gates for this Gen AI use. So this is one of those areas where I like to say that security folks, we have assumptions about all of these things, but it's going to be your data science teams, your DevOps folks, they're going to have the answers. So we don't want to be making assumptions as the baseline of what we make other decisions on. So what I mean by your colleagues are going to have the answers is that they're going to be able to tell you things like, what was the LLM that was chosen to run this application that you're all building? What were the sources of data used to train that thing? Do they understand what's behind this LLM? And as you're developing this application, what data sources is it getting pointed to pull from as well? Whether it's an internal graph, some database, what's in that database? Questions like that. What does that pipeline look like, the flow of data that's getting pulled through this application before it gets delivered to whoever's requesting it? Are there gates in place? Gates in the sense of like a filter, pre-processing, post-processing. So is it able to do things like, say, if the user is trying to, if the result that's being generated back to the user, there's a bit of a check at the end as a filter to say, is this something that is going to be offensive? Is this something that you don't want shown to the user? So what are some of those concerns and those requirements that are getting built in as gates? Because if there's going to be, out of all of this, all these conversations you're having with your internal stakeholders about the use, the data sources, the concerns that they have about gates, does this involve personal data at all? That's the key thing that you're trying to really get to in these conversations of what is that data? Because if it's going to involve personal data, you're going to want to think about what are the possible controls to apply here. And a lot of times it's not going to be your traditional DLP controls and technologies. It's going to be a bunch of other tools in your arsenal, things around masking, redaction, okay, maybe some DLP for blocking prompts in certain cases and responses, but there's more heavy reliance on other controls that fall more along the realm of like privacy-preserving technologies. And option 3, training a custom model. So a lot of the other things that I spoke about, the policies, the getting your internal stakeholders together, those are all things that still apply in this type of use case. But a really big one is going to be setting that foundation for data governance, because that is a big key behind all of this, especially as it relates to data quality, doing things like consent management, if it's using personal data in some way. But data governance is something that's not necessarily within the purview of security folks. You are involved, but you're not necessarily leading it because it's a much broader data management type of effort. So this is where your data folks are going to have a heavy role to play, and we are there to support them along with the privacy leaders within the company. But where you might step in is that as concerns are getting raised about privacy, personal data use, to look around to see what are some possible technologies and tools to help support this. So this is where the privacy-preserving tech capabilities can come in to do things like better control your training data. And privacy-preserving tech, it's not a single technology, but rather a bunch of different approaches and capabilities that fall under this broader umbrella. So think of it as it's across 3 different buckets. One is your privacy filtering types of technologies that can help control what users may see or what's shown to them, how they're accessing and using this data. So that's going to be your capabilities like masking, redaction. It's going to be things like tokenization as well. Another category of privacy-preserving tech is your security controls around the data processing itself and data in use. So think homomorphic encryption is a key technology that falls under this bucket. And the final and third category of privacy-preserving tech is more the data controls that protect the processing environment. So it's stuff like confidential computing. But for most use cases, you're probably going to be on that first category, the privacy filtering types of technologies that get applied here. Glitter, DLP. So we talked a lot about the inputs, like the training, the prompt piece of it, the prompts and the controls there, but the outputs are the last area that we want to focus on in terms of controls. But it gets a bit messy because some of these technologies that we're hoping exist don't quite exist yet. And there's going to be a variety of things that you might want to consider when you're trying to control the outputs and control these responses. The first one is going to be defining that scope and that purpose for, well, what are we trying to do? What do we mean by control the responses? Is it really around the governance and the accountability for how this response is being used by a human? Is it control in the sense of doing something to it to demonstrate that this is an authentic or an official type of response that we are going to trust and rely on and take an action upon? Is it control in the sense of we need to apply some type of protection to it? Like we're going to mask or redact the sensitive bits that come out in this response. So all of these are really different objectives, and being able to identify which is the one that matters, which is the one you're trying to do, is going to help get you down the right path to the approach that you need to take. Because there's going to be approaches where you can rely on existing technology controls, whether it's going to be DLP, tokenization, something else. But it's also going to take you down a path of perhaps looking at other things, other concerns like response and content moderation. This is a bit different because it addresses more the risk of something being developed and generated by these applications that you don't want showing to somebody because it's considered offensive or it's considered something that it's just not appropriate. And then watermarking has been talked about quite a bit as well, but this is one where I would caution folks to just don't get too excited yet. It sounds great in theory. There are things that are visible watermarks, which could be helpful in saying, well, this is something that was AI generated, or I've heard of also people trying to think about using watermarks as a way of saying that this piece of content it's authentic. You can trust it, because that's a great thing. We want people to be able to trust these things. But then there's also watermarks that are invisible, that are machine identifiable. But out of all of these, I say don't get too excited because these are things that can be tampered with, they can be removed, they can be scrubbed, they can be added by someone who wants to add them in some way. So it's not a thing that I would trust just yet. Standards are emerging in this area. I've heard of 2 standards bodies that are trying to do something around here to create standards around watermarking for AI-generated content. And that can vary too when we're talking about AI-generated content. Is it watermarks for images or files or something else? Watermarking for code has been tossed around, but it's early. It is early days. So let's not pin too much on watermarking just yet, but keep an eye on its development is the key takeaway here. Legal frameworks have also come up as a possible way of controlling these outputs. But again, we can't get too excited here either because things like copyright, trade secrets protection, patents, these are things that are not going to save us when it comes to protecting these Gen AI outputs. In the US, at least, copyrights and patents, they only apply to things that are human-generated. So the AI-generated stuff is not within that purview. For trade secrets, this would apply to something that is like a business secret, something that's not going to be made public, which maybe you can apply this to training data, but again, it's a bit shaky. And this is also going to vary depending on region, country as well. So things are a little bit different in Europe with all of these laws. So you could talk to your legal teams about possible options, but just don't rely on that as the thing that's going to save you here. And so here's the overall approach, things to think about. There's also the policy piece of it, which is also important because you want to give people guardrails, guidance about what to do, how to use these tools, how to use them appropriately. And so a lot of folks will start with the policies that they already have. So this was a study that we conducted July of last year, where 37% of respondents, these AI decision makers, told us that they had updated their existing policies to include Gen AI. Others were creating standalone policies for this, as well as creating standalone policies that were down to the department level for Gen AI use. And you can see these percentages, but today I would imagine that it's going to be a little bit higher across all of these bars, just based on the conversations I've been having the last couple of months with various organizations. People are getting serious about developing their standalone policies, updating existing policies. And there's no right or wrong order of which one you do first. You might develop the standalone one before you go update the existing ones, or if you're already in a cycle where you are updating these other policies, you can get that done first as well. And here are some examples of the kinds of policies you would be updating and looking at. So acceptable use, code of conduct, privacy are common ones. If you're building this into products and services, perhaps also your licensing agreements as well. So these are just common ones to take a look at, but there may be others that you find as you do this review with your internal teams that might need a bit of an update. So I think of this as it's having the impact the way that social media technologies or use of cloud services had when they first came onto the scene. We had to think about how employees were trying to use this for work purposes and give them guidance about what was appropriate. And if you're developing your bring your own AI policy, so this is the policy that would apply to use of all the public apps that are out there. A couple of areas to focus on, like how do you use this? What do you use it for? What steps you have to take to protect sensitive information? And a bit of info about how IT is thinking about this going forward, as well as who they might go to if they have questions about use. Okay, so we talked a lot about technologies. We covered policies a bit, but I'm coming back to the tech piece of it here, going through some key categories of technologies that I feel are going to be helpful as you're trying to better control and wrangle your data when it comes to Gen AI use. But also a quick disclaimer in that this is not an exhaustive list, it's not a short list of recommendations, but I'll talk about categories of tech and example vendors in each. Reason being is that I don't know your environment. I don't know the other solutions and things that are in place, other dependencies. So I don't know if the blue eyeshadow is going to work for you or if Dusty Rose is a better bet. And that's on you to decide. But with different use cases, you're going to look at different technologies. I'd say classification, discovery tools are going to be key across all of them. It gives you context, better understanding about your data, and possible risks of using that type of data. Data access governance is going to be most helpful here when you're trying to use the Gen AI capabilities embedded in other tools. DLP capabilities have their role to play in a couple of scenarios as well. And privacy-preserving tech cuts across too also. So let's look at examples. Discovery and classification, foundational. You'll have standalone providers of technology with this capability. It's also something you see embedded into other things. Like your DLP tools will have discovery and classification as well. A lot of cloud data security tools, things that are describing themselves as DSPM will also have this capability. And we're starting to see some interesting things happening because the likes of like a security.ai, for example, not only can they do things like discover and classify your data, but they're also doing the same with AI models to tell you what's in use. Data access governance gives you confidence to proceed, helps you wrangle the permissions and entitlements that are open access. So these are just a couple of examples of key providers in that space. And DLP. DLP is everywhere, like litter. And so there's a lot of areas where you can get this functionality to help with Gen AI. Browser security tools are one. So think of the enterprise browsers, like an Island, like a Talon, like a Surf, that can help you to enable DLP capabilities there. There's also others here, like a LayerX, Seraphic as well. There's AI security platforms that are building in some of these capabilities too. And these are just a couple of examples. I believe Harmonic is actually in the Innovation Sandbox this year, so that's really cool. And with AI security platforms, you're going to run into a lot of marketing noise. I've seen the term AI governance get thrown around quite a bit and find that it can take you down two different paths. Sometimes these startups, these solutions will refer to AI governance in the sense of the data, concerns around the data, governing its use, whether it's personal info, sensitive info, things that are going into these models as well as out. Other times, when vendors are talking about AI governance, they're more referring to protections and controls around the model itself and potential threats, attacks to this model. So it's a little bit different. Insider risk solutions oftentimes have DLP capabilities as well. Same with your standalone DLP tools, and your SSE solutions will have DLP built in. And so chances are you may already have some of these in your environment that you can use and play with for this purpose. Privacy-preserving tech. So these are a couple of examples that I've come across to show how varied they are in terms of their approaches and what they can offer for helping you to enable more granular controls for data use in some of the more advanced use cases in interactions with LLMs. So Portal 26 is one of those it's like an AI security platform. Protecto.ai gives you a bit of role-based access control around the data. Sherpa helps with training data using federated learning. So they're not sending everything into a model. It's more all the learning is done locally. It aggregates the results, and then it shoves it up into the global model. And you've got the likes of a Skyflow as well that can help with protecting your training data. So back to the focus here of where we started this morning with DLP as an outcome. So keep bringing yourself back to that so that it gives you flexibility in how you approach this with the technologies and tools that you aim to bring in to support you. And what did we do here today? So we approach this with the mindset of DLP as an outcome. We recognize that these privacy concerns, these risks, it both applies to the data itself, the data that you're using for these use cases, and how you use it in the end. What decisions are being made off of this data? And we saw the DLP capability to block. It was only one component, one control that you have available to you for data security when you're thinking about Gen AI use. There are going to be other ones that can help. You clarified the why for using DLP capabilities, because there is a purpose for DLP in some of these use cases and different points. And you get there when you define the scope of what it is you're trying to achieve. And also reinforce the need for clear policies and guidance here. But one more thing, because it's easy to still get stuck. And I find that this can be a helpful added exercise for clarifying that why, to get you to what is that appropriate tool that you want to think about? What is that appropriate technology control for the data? So you could use this thing to fill out. You might not fill it out in order, but as you're thinking about the different pieces and components of this, it forces you to really get specific, to narrow it down. And this can be helpful for when you are trying to cut across a lot of the noise that you see in marketing today, where just about everybody is telling you that their solution is DLP, or that their solution can be the answer to this. If you can have some clarity as to the pieces of this statement, that can help you to weed through things pretty quickly to say, nope, this is not what I'm looking for, or yes, this potentially starts us down the right path. So DLP as an outcome for Gen AI. You can do this. So next week, as you get back, take a look at the current state of things. Identify how is this being used within your organization. Who are the key stakeholders that have concerns, have things to say about this? Assess the current state of policies as well to see where things are at. Have they been updated? Has this not been touched at all? So within the first 3 months, you can start to get a little bit deeper in terms of understanding LLMs and their use within your organization, and then start to back out what are the relevant risks and the threats that apply based on those use cases that people are very excited about and trying to move very fast with. And the key thing you're trying to answer here is, because it's all about the data, what data is being processed? Is it personal data? Is it corporate data? Is it both of these things? Because that's going to give you some direction of, well, what controls should we start thinking about? Create or update the relevant policies for use, as well as take a look in your existing environment. What do you have currently that could be applied for this purpose to get you to DLP as an outcome? And start to identify the gaps of what just is not there yet. And then within 6 months, start to explore some of the newer, perhaps emerging technologies that can help to fill those gaps. But as you do this, keep an open mind, because there may be some things that just, they don't exist yet from a technology perspective to do what we hope, especially when it comes to controls around Gen AI. So we are building this plane as we fly it, folks. So we are in for an adventure. And thank you very much. I think we have some time for questions left if folks have things they'd like to talk about.
Thank you. So first of all, it was a great presentation. I learned so much today. And the second thing, like with respect to Gen AI, one of the biggest issue I think nowadays is incident response. You know how easy it is for someone to find a compromised account with Copilot? Now attacker does not have to go through the entire cyber kill chain. They can just ask Copilot, like, how I can create a phishing email which is more targeted, and they can find all the resources they have access to. So what can be done better with respect to incident response? But like how, you know, security professionals can do best to like deal with all these kind of issues when it comes to Gen AI, how DLP can help.
With the co-pilots that security teams will use
Yes,
for
with
IR.
respect to incident response, how DLP can help with respect to incident response.
For IR use cases, I mean, right now it's, if I think about the top things, the helpful thing might be to try to enforce privacy compliance within that response in that investigation.
Yeah.
In the sense of kind of like what some of your traditional DLP tools can do today. They're not showing the personal information until a certain point in the investigation where it can get approved and,
Yeah.
and shown. Throughout the course of the rest of the investigation,
Because like most of the time when it comes to real incident, the attacker has already access to a legit user account. They are not doing it anything like with unauthorized account. They have the access, but their access is unauthorized. Now they have access to all the data which authorized users have access to.
as the investigator,
Yeah, what I can do with respect to DLP to investigate those type of issues.
that I am not sure. It's a great question. I might try to.
Thank you, thank
Yeah.
you. No.
Thank you for that, though. It's something we'll have to try to poke around with. Hi.
I was wondering, what experience have you seen around Purview in terms of data discovery? You didn't have that as one of the tools, and I thought that was a realm it played in.
Purview, with what they do with discovery and classification, so this was, the capability is something that they acquired years ago from a different company and folded it in to Purview. The thing that I find with trying to use Purview to do that labeling with the sensitivity labels to classify is that in a lot of organizations, they still rely on people to do this manually, to flip that tag, to pick it. And to do it manually, to me, is not a sustainable approach, given the volumes of data and just getting people to change their workflows. In some organizations, it's done, but it is really hard. In most places, I see folks trying to automate this in some way. Like, you could try to do some default policies within Purview. You might want to, I think, if you have E5, that gives you some of the automated capabilities within Purview. But even then, it's something that I would recommend to my clients. You test it out a bit, see if it's actually classifying it accurately for you.
And it's the discovery part as well, not just...
Oh, not just the labeling part.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can be hit or miss. I think there are some other tools that you might want to bring in to automate as a check against it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi. I have a question. What is your take on, I think it's your second tier with AI that's built into some of the applications like Salesforce and Microsoft. What's your take on federated learning and how some of those AI offerings in the tools are using federated learning to anonymize data between different LLMs?
I think it's a really promising approach and one that is worth exploring and asking about when you have providers that have this capability in there to see whether they use it or if this is one where you might want to bring in like a third-party tool when you're trying to develop and build your own apps.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so when I refer to controlling the response and authenticity in that particular context, it's more of the use case where you have organizations that may be using Gen AI to create some type of content that they then want to put out publicly. I've talked to some governments about this, where they want their workers to be able to use this type of technology, but perhaps now this is a communication that goes out publicly, but they want to inform people that there was some machine AI-generated involvement in this, but you can still trust this because it's coming from us, we've checked it, it's been vetted. So that's what I mean by the authenticity in that case.
What are some of the DLP controls that you would recommend for the SaaS code repositories? because we have a lot of developers uploading into the SaaS tool, right? So I was wondering if you had any recommendations.
The DLP for SaaS tools?
Yeah, so for code repositories, basically, because with SaaS products, with the SaaS and cloud, the developers tend to upload their code, and now what kind of DLP controls would you have for that?
Yeah, this is one where I think it may be a bit of a gap in traditional DLP solutions. I've heard of some of the more insider risk solutions focused on this as a particular use case. This is where Code 42 was talking about this as one, but oftentimes when you're looking at these insider risk solutions, like they get pretty specific in terms of either the types of employees or the audiences and the tools that they're using and the capabilities that they're using to also detect what is considered suspicious or weird.
Good, all right.
Okay, thank you.